Welcome to Orensha Tech's PowerShell series. In this video, we're going to go over the basics of scripting. Now, there are two main ways to use PowerShell. The first being through the command line interface, which is what we've been primarily doing in the videos up until this point. But there's also another way where you write all your commands out into a script and then save that as a file, and then you can run that script whenever you want, simulating running all of those commands in the command line interface, giving you the results that you're wanting. Now, scripting does navigate into the more programming side of PowerShell, and it can be a little bit daunting, but it does unlock a whole new world of potential for you. And people have created full-blown applications using PowerShell, although running commands in the command line interface is almost equally as powerful for administrating the many systems that PowerShell connects to. And one of the main benefits of the command line interface is the ability to run your commands and then fix your errors in real time so that you can then polish all of those commands that you want to put into a script, save it in that file, and then you can make your administration 100 times easier by putting all of your commonly run commands into a file to run as a script. It doesn't need to delve into the application side and the programming side, although what we've been learning so far in our videos has been preparing you to get familiar with that programming side so that when you're ready, you can dive into that aspect of PowerShell and use it in your scripts to use logic and all that fun stuff to create more robust scripts. Now, in this video, we are going to be focusing on that scenario where we're taking the commands that we're running all the time and we're going to put those into a file. And a good comparison for this is a batch file. So you might be familiar with taking your Windows commands, putting those in a file, creating a batch file and running those. That is very similar to what we're going to be doing here in this video. And before we jump into that, I do want to point out that you're going to need a good text editor to create your scripts. Obviously, I'm using Visual Studio Code, and I do think that that's a great tool. It has the PowerShell extension built into it, and that gives you a lot of added functionality to creating your PowerShell scripts, though there are a lot of options. So definitely feel free to go and search for yourself and find something that you like. But I will point out the cool things that I like in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to pull up a script that I wrote here that goes through all of the user profiles on a computer and then collects the files in that user's downloads folder and then looks for any files over 100 megabytes and returns those to a file here. So the idea behind this is that it's going to show me any huge files that a user may have downloaded that needs to be cleaned up in the event that the disk space on a server or computer is running low. So this is a valuable script that you could run on a number of computers and quickly help you find files. And you can even use the outputs of this script to then go and actually delete those files if you've determined that they no longer need to be there. But as far as some of the tools that Visual Studio Code gives us for this script, in the upper right hand corner, there's going to be this play button, and that is the run button. And this actually is going to run the script. So just like that, we ran this script on my computer. We can see it found 19 total large files in all of the user downloads folders, totaling 32 gigabytes of data. So that right there is a sizable chunk of data that I could go and clean up. Usually things in downloads folders don't need to be there anymore. So again, an excellent tool for you to use. And I will put this on my GitHub page in case anyone wants to grab this later. But jumping back into some of the other tools that Visual Studio Code gives us, if we go up to this Run tab here at the top and drop it down, we can see we have Start Debugging, and that links to the keyboard shortcut of F5. And that's going to be the same exact thing that we just did. So instead of hitting that run button, we can always hit F5. And something to point out here, it mentions debugging. In Visual Studio Code, it actually gives us the ability to set breakpoints over here on the left-hand side. You can see it's letting me set a breakpoint in the script so that when we run this, we can actually go through this step by step and find any errors. So that alludes to PowerShell's ability to act like a programming language. So a lot of cool tools that we have in Visual Studio Code. I do recommend it, but again, there are a lot of tools for this. So again, the main benefit of this is that we are easily able to repeat these commands by storing them in a script file and simply running that script. And you can see if you have something that has 100 commands, this easily becomes worth it and something that you're going to want to become good at. And then one last piece of Visual Studio Code that I'll point out, if you highlight a command and then hit F8, it's going to run just that command. So we stored a date into our date variable. So now if I run that back, we can see that I was able to just run this one command by highlighting it and pressing F8. So that's great for writing out your script and then being able to easily run that one line at a time for testing and debugging. All right, let's jump into the actual script and look at ways that we improve our scripts once we have all of the commands that we want inside of that script file. So the first thing we're going to look at is parameterizing our commands. And if we look through the script, we can see right at the top here, I have a variable for outPath, and that ties here at the end to the path that I put my file with the data that we collected from the script. So this is a perfect example of adding a parameter to this script because this may not be the same location every time that we run this script. And we might want to specify a different location that we put that file of all the collected information from the script. But what are some of the other ones that we can create here? If we look here, we can see that I'm getting all of the files over 100 megabytes. So that is another great example of something that we can parameterize because we might want to specify any file over 1 megabyte or even making that higher and going 1,000 to create something over 1 gigabyte. So let's add a parameter for this and we'll name this file size. And then we'll come down here and we'll put in our variable for that. And then let's look at some other ones that we might be able to create. And this right here, so we're cycling through the downloads folder, but what if we wanted to choose a different folder such as documents or desktop? So this is another great candidate for a parameter. So we'll create one for directory. And we'll set that equal to downloads. And then we can put our variable where we had downloads previously right there. Okay, and then we always rerun our scripts after making a change just to make sure that it all still works. And there we go. Everything still works in the script with our variables and our parameters that we've created. So now let's actually work towards creating a way that we can specify these parameters directly when we run the script. So to do that, we'll just put param and then put all of our variables inside of parentheses. And then a good way to look at this is that we are creating an array of variables. So we need to put a comma after each of these, except for the last one, as we know about arrays. But we need a comma separating each of the variables to create that array. And then also, we don't actually need to assign these to anything, but by doing so, we create default values. And it's a good habit to create default values if there's something that makes sense to assign as the default. In this instance, I'm creating the defaults in the basic way that we want to run this script. But as far as parameterizing the script, it's as simple as putting those variables inside of parentheses with the param indicator right on the outside. So now, if I wanted to run this script and change those parameters, all I have to do is specify the script name with a period backslash to indicate the current folder, and then we'll use get user files.ps1, and then we'll specify our first parameter, and we do that the same way with other commands with a dash and the name of the parameter. And then let's change this to 500, and then we'll specify our out path and change this to C Orensha, and then we'll change our directory to desktop. So here we can see it actually didn't change the way that it ran, and that's because I didn't save my file. So there's something always to remember: save your files after making changes. So let's clear this and then run that again. And we can just use our up arrow to get to the command that we just ran, and we'll run that. And the results were different here. So it actually found 0 large files over our 500 megabyte limit that we specified there. And something to point out about those parameters is that they are also positional. So we could have also ran this. Got our script name, and then we can just put in 100, our out file path, and then the directory that we want to search. So let's search documents this time. So there it found 0 as well. Now I'm the only user on this computer, but this does become more valuable when you have a shared computer or a server. Okay, next let's move on to documentation. So the basic way to add comments to your scripts is using the hash symbol, and then anything after that on that line will be a comment. So it's not going to be ran as a command, and it's not going to be interpreted at all by the compiler. So that's one way. And then the other way, you can create block comments by using your pointing bracket with the hash symbol there, and you can see it created the ending there. So now anything between these is going to be commented out. So now we've given this script a little bit of documentation so that anyone that opens up this script can see what it does. However, there is a much better way to do this, and PowerShell gives us some default structure to comments that we can use that then allows us to actually run the help command on our scripts and gives us that familiar view for help on the scripts that we create. So I'm going to jump over to one that I've already created all of this, and we'll scroll up to the top here, and we can see the first piece of this script is the initializer here for this to be a comment block. And then you simply use a period, and then for this one it's synopsis, so this is that brief description. And then I put in a brief description, but then we can give a longer description using the period description. So then you can give a more elaborate description about how your script works. And then you can even specify how each of the parameters work by using period, parameter, space, and then the parameter name. So I've got one for file size, directory, out path, and then the last one here, dot example, allows you to create an example of how this script is run. And then right here, we use our closing indicator for this comment block. And like I said, this allows us to then run help on this script. And I've got a different name for this one, so let's run help. And that gives us the familiar help file that we're used to seeing for all of the commands that are in the modules that we've imported into PowerShell. And then I can space through this to look at all of the documentation that I've written into that comment block here above. So for scripts that you're creating for your company or any script that you expect to share, this is always a best practice. Just take the little bit of extra time to fully write up the documentation for your script. Not only is it going to help other people, but it's going to help you when you come back 6 months later and you ask yourself, what did this script do? Well, you've created this documentation that tells you exactly how the script works, so you remember. So beneficial for you and for other people. so that you give your scripts a little bit more robust technology and define exactly what it does. And then one other thing I'm going to cover with scripts that I want to point out is the ability to create line breaks. And there's a few ways to do this. The best way is to try to create a line break after a pipe symbol here. That's going to be a perfect example of a good line break. But you can also use a backtick. So if we put a backtick here and then enter to create a new line, this puts this entire command on the same line. And the idea behind this is to help create a cleaner look for your scripts so that you don't have lines that go far off onto the right to where you're having to scroll over to see them. Although if you are in Visual Studio Code, you can always scale your windows and force it to go left, and it's just going to wrap your text for you. So that's a good way that Visual Studio handles it. But as far as in that raw script file, try to create your line breaks as much as you can to create a very clean look behind your script. All right, next let's go over some of the differences between running commands in a script and running them in the command line interface. So running commands inside your shell and inside your script is going to behave the same most of the time. But there are scenarios where it's not going to behave the same, and it could give you results that you're not expecting. So the main difference there is that when you run commands inside your shell and hit enter, you have one pipeline. So then you could run another command and hit enter, and that gives you a separate pipeline. So those two pipelines are going to give you two different results and two different result structures. However, if you were to run those commands inside of a script, it's all going to be within the same pipeline. So as an example, we'll run git process, and then we'll just filter out to just the first 5 objects here. And then say we ran a command such as git date. So if we ran each of these independently in the shell, we get process objects returned to us in this one, but we're going to get a date object returned to us in this one. However, if we ran this in the script here, we can see that it gave us our process objects, but then it formatted our date object in a weird way. So it's not the same, and it's something that you want to be very aware of when you're creating your scripts, that you want to try to only return one type of object in that script. So a good way to get past this is you just assign your results to a variable, and then it doesn't actually put that into the pipeline and allows you to use that at a later time in your script. So definitely be aware of that so that you're not putting two different types of objects into your pipeline and then skewing your results into something that you're not expecting. And then the last thing that we're going to cover is scope. So as a recap, scope is the container in which your PowerShell elements, variables, aliases, and functions all apply. And usually that scope is going to be the PowerShell process that you have open for your shell. So if I create a variable and assign that to 30, the scope of that variable is the current PowerShell process that's running, that I'm linking to in my Visual Studio Code instance here. But when you run a script, the scope of the script is just that script. So if I come up here and create a var and assign it to 15, then the scope of this is going to be just that script. And then we'll also have it return var so we can see the result there. So now if we run this script using period backslash in the name of our script, we can see that var returned 15. But if we run var again here, it actually is going to return 30 because that's what we assigned var to above the script. So in this instance, var being 15 only applies to the scope of the script that is running. And this can get more granular to where if you have a function inside of your script or inside of your shell, then anything inside that function is only going to apply to the scope of that function or the life cycle of that function. So any variables that you create in the function or in the script are only going to apply to those scopes. Now there is such thing as a global scope, and your PowerShell processes and scripts are going to inherit anything from that global scope. But that is a topic for a different video. We're not going to cover that here. Just remember that scope is going to limit the context in which your variables and results apply. So if you do need to pass something from one scope to another, such as a script back to your PowerShell process, then utilize your input and output features to pass the results between different scopes. And that wraps up this video on scripting basics. In the next video, we're going to go over improving our scripts. But until then, thanks for watching and have a good day.